The gunshot rang like thunder across the dusty plains of Cottonwood Creek, but Vaughn Quinn didn't even flinch. He'd grown accustomed to the sound over his 15 years riding the western frontier. What he hadn't grown accustomed to was the sight before him now. A slender woman with honey-brown hair standing beneath a tattered canvas awning, surrounded by a dozen dirty-faced children, each clutching a tattered book as if it were made of gold. Texas, 1878. The Civil War had been over for 13 years, but its shadows still haunted the West. Vaughn had ridden into town that morning, his stallion kicking up dust along the main street. Cottonwood Creek wasn't much more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence along a strip of hard, packed dirt. But it had a saloon, and that was all Vaughn had been looking for. Until he heard the children's voices reciting in unison, an unexpected sound that pulled him from his intended path. The woman, she couldn't be more than 25, stood with her back straight, pointing to letters scratched onto a piece of slate. Her dress was faded blue calico, patched in places but clean. Something about the determined set of her shoulders made Vaughn rein his horse to a stop. Again, she said, her voice carrying across the yard, sounded out slowly. "See, a T spells cat," the children responded, their voices a discordant chorus. Vaughn dismounted, tying his horse to a post. He wasn't sure what drew him closer, curiosity perhaps, or the simple novelty of education in a place like this. The children noticed him first, their eyes widening at the sight of his worn leather chaps, the Colt .45 strapped to his hip, and the dust of 100 miles coating his duster. The woman turned, and for a moment, Vaughn forgot to breathe. Her eyes were the color of summer sage, set in a face that had known both sunshine and sorrow. When she spotted him, her hand instinctively moved to gather the children closer, like a mother hen protecting her chicks. "Can I help you, sir?" Her voice was steady, but Vaughn recognized the wariness in it. "No, madam," he replied, removing his hat. "Just passing through, didn't expect to see a school in these parts." A flicker of pride crossed her features. "It's not a school, not properly. I'm just teaching these children what they ought to know." She hesitated, then added, "I'm Bethany Garrison." "Vaughn Quinn," he offered, keeping his distance so as not to frighten the little ones who were staring at him with a mixture of fear and fascination. The smallest child, a girl with braids the color of wheat, tugged at Bethany's skirt. "Is he a real cowboy, Miss Bethany?" Before she could answer, the distant sound of breaking glass interrupted them, followed by raucous male laughter from the direction of the saloon. "Time to finish for today," Bethany said quickly, her eyes darting toward the noise. "Remember your letters for tomorrow." The children reluctantly closed their books, clutching them to their chests as they dispersed, some running toward the cluster of ramshackle cabins at the edge of town, others disappearing into the alley behind the general store. Vaughn watched them go, puzzled. "School day ends mighty early." Bethany's mouth set in a grim line. "It ends when the drinking starts. Some of the men in town don't take kindly to what I'm doing. And what exactly is that, teaching orphans to read?" She began gathering her meager supplies, the slate, a few pieces of chalk, a stack of mismatched books. Most of these children lost their parents to the war or disease or other troubles. The town tolerates them as long as they're useful fetching water, sweeping floors, but education, she shook her head, that's seen as a waste of time. Vaughn knelt to pick up a fallen primer that had been mended with twine. "Knowledge is never a waste, madam." She gave him an appraising look, as if trying to determine whether he was sincere. "You'd be in the minority with that opinion around here, Mr. Quinn." Another crash from the saloon, followed by angry voices. Bethany flinched. "Where do you hold your lessons regularly?" Vaughn asked, noticing the lack of any proper structure for the children. "Wherever we can, under this awning when it's dry. Inside the abandoned storeroom behind the mercantile when it rains." She balanced the stack of books in her arms. "We make do." Something about her dignity in the face of such meager circumstances stirred something in Vaughn. He'd been drifting for years, taking work where he could find at cattle drives, ranch hands, occasionally using his skill with a gun when necessary. But he'd never felt particularly needed anywhere. Let me help you with those, he said, reaching for the books. She hesitated before allowing him to take them. Thank you, but I'm quite capable. I've no doubt of that, Mrs. Garrison. Miss Garrison once. It's Mrs. Garrison now, though there hasn't been a Mr. Garrison for 3 years. Her voice held no self-pity, just statement of fact. I'm sorry for your loss, Vaughn said quietly. Bethany nodded in acknowledgement. This way, she said, leading him toward a small cabin set apart from the main street. The children come here for lessons when the weather's too poor for outdoors. The cabin was barely more than a shack, a single room with a packed dirt floor, a pot-bellied stove in one corner, and rough-hewn shelves holding a few precious books. A hand-stitched quilt hung over the only window, softening the harsh sunlight. It's not much, she said, setting her slate against the wall, but it serves our purpose. Vaughn placed the books carefully on a wooden crate that served as a table. How many children do you teach? 14 regularly. A few more come and go. She busied herself arranging the books by size. Most are orphans, though a couple have parents too busy working to mind them. And you do this alone, she gave a small, sad smile. Who else would do it? The town has more saloons than people willing to teach children their letters. Vaughn stepped back outside, surveying the surrounding area. The cabin sat on a small plot of cleared land, with enough space for his mind began calculating lumber, nails, time. Mrs. Garrison, he said suddenly. What would you say to a proper schoolhouse? She blinked at him, confusion evident. I would say it's a lovely dream, Mr. Quinn, but dreams don't put roofs over children's heads. No, he agreed, a plan forming in his mind, but hard work and determination might. That night, Vaughn sat in the corner of the rusty Spur saloon, nursing a whiskey and listening. He'd learned long ago that the fastest way to know a town was to keep your mouth shut and your ears open. That widow woman's still playing teacher with them orphan brats, a red-faced rancher complained to the barkeep, filling their heads with nonsense when they should be learning useful work. She means well, the barkeeper replied, wiping down the scarred wooden bar. Bethany's got a good heart. Too good, another man interjected. Them children ain't going nowhere, reading won't fill empty bellies. Vaughn kept his expression neutral, though his grip on the glass tightened. He'd spent the afternoon asking discreet questions about Bethany Garrison. The story was a familiar one in these parts. She'd come west with her husband seeking opportunity, only to lose him to a fever that swept through the town 3 winters ago. Instead of returning east, she'd stayed, taking in orphan children and teaching them when no one else would bother. The next morning before dawn, Vaughn rode to the lumber mill 2 towns over. By the time he returned to Cottonwood Creek, his horse was pulling a wagon loaded with planks. His pockets were considerably lighter, and he had a promise from 3 former ranch hands he'd worked with years ago to meet him at Bethany's cabin by noon. Bethany was outside hanging laundry when he arrived. She froze at the sight of him with the wagon full of lumber. Mr. Quinn, what is the meaning of this? Vaughn jumped down from the wagon. I told you, a proper schoolhouse. She stared at him, disbelief etched on her features. You can't be serious. As a rattlesnake in July, madam, he began unloading planks. I've got help coming. We'll have the frame up by sundown and a roof on by morning. But why? Her voice held bewilderment. You don't know me. You don't know these children. Vaughn paused, considering his words carefully. I know what it's like to wish for learning and be denied it. He didn't elaborate further, but the memory of his own childhood of being pulled from the only school he'd ever attended after his father died, forced to work the ranch at age 11, felt fresh in that moment. Besides, every child deserves a chance, don't they? Before she could respond, the children began appearing, drawn by the sight of the wagon and activity. They hung back uncertainly until Bethany beckoned them forward. It seems, she said, her voice slightly unsteady, that Mr. Quinn has decided our lessons need a proper home. The smallest girl, the one who'd asked if Vaughn was a real cowboy, approached him cautiously. Are you building us a schoolhouse, mister? Vaughn knelt to her level. What's your name, little lady? Emma, she whispered. Well, Emma, I'm certainly going to try, but I could use some help. He glanced at the other children who were watching wide-eyed. Any of you youngsters know how to hold a hammer? By midday, the site was a hive of activity. Vaughn's friends Sam, Hector, and Wiley had arrived as promised, bringing additional tools and materials. The older boys among the orphans eagerly fetched water and held boards in place, while the girls and younger children sorted nails and brought food that Bethany hastily prepared. Bethany herself worked alongside them, her skirts tied up, handling a saw with surprising skill. When Vaughn raised an eyebrow, she smiled the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "I was a carpenter's daughter before I was a teacher," she explained. "My father believed girls should know useful trades, not just embroidery." The day progressed with steady work, interrupted only by a group of town men who stopped to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Among them was the red-faced rancher from the saloon, Silas Tanner, whose land sprawled north of town. "What's all this, then?" he demanded, hands on his belt. Vaughn straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Building a schoolhouse." "On whose authority?" "Mine," Bethany interjected, stepping forward. "The land belongs to me. What I do with it is my concern." Tanner spat on the ground. "You're wasting your time, widow, and corrupting these young'uns with false hopes." "The only false thing here is the notion that children don't deserve education," Vaughn replied evenly. For a tense moment, it seemed Tanner might escalate the confrontation, but after surveying the determined faces around him, including the 3 seasoned cowhands flanking Vaughn, he merely shook his head and walked away, his companions following. "He won't be the only one opposed to this," Bethany said quietly when they'd gone. "Opposition's just proof you're doing something worthwhile," Vaughn replied, returning to the task of setting posts for the walls. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the framework of a modest building stood where there had been only empty space that morning. 20 feet by 30, with tall windows planned for each wall to catch the light, it was simple but sturdy. The children had stayed far longer than their usual lesson time, reluctant to leave even as the younger ones began to droop with fatigue. Bethany finally shooed them home with promises that tomorrow's lessons would take place at the construction site. As twilight deepened into dusk, Vaughn's friends built a fire and set up camp beside the half-finished structure, determined to guard their materials through the night. Bethany brought them coffee and a pot of stew. "You men are welcome to sleep in my cabin," she offered. "It's small but drier than the ground." "We're fine here, madam," Sam replied, tipping his hat. "Used to sleeping rough." Bethany nodded, then turned to Vaughn. "May I speak with you privately, Mr. Quinn?" They walked a short distance from the fire, stopping beneath the spreading branches of a cottonwood tree that gave the town its name. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. "No thanks needed." "Nevertheless, you have it." She studied him in the fading light. "But I must ask, why are you really doing this? Men don't generally ride into town and build schoolhouses for strangers." Vaughn leaned against the tree trunk, considering how much to share. "When I was a boy in Missouri, I had a teacher who believed in me. Taught me that there was more to life than just surviving. After he died, I never found that again." He paused. "What you're doing with these children, it matters, maybe more than you know." Bethany was silent for a moment. "My husband had similar thoughts. Daniel believed education was the key to a better life. It's why we came west to start a school where there was none." Her voice softened. "After he died, continuing his work was the only thing that kept me from giving up entirely." The vulnerability in her admission touched something in Vaughn. "He sounds like a good man." He was. She looked toward the skeletal frame of the schoolhouse, now silhouetted against the darkening sky. This would have made him very happy. They stood in companionable silence until the first stars appeared. Before they parted for the night, Bethany touched Vaughn's arm lightly. "Tomorrow, Mr. Quinn, I insist you join us for breakfast before work resumes. It's the least I can do." "I'd be honored, Mrs. Garrison." Sleep came slowly to Vaughn that night, despite his physical exhaustion. He lay beneath the stars, listening to the rhythmic breathing of his companions and the distant coyote calls. His thoughts kept returning to Bethany, her quiet strength, the grace with which she faced adversity, the light in her eyes when she worked with the children. It had been a long time since a woman had affected him this way. Dawn broke with a palette of pinks and golds painting the eastern sky. Vaughn and his friends were already measuring and cutting roof boards when Bethany arrived with the promised breakfast hot biscuits, bacon, and coffee strong enough to make a man's spurs curl. The children trickled in soon after, eager to see the progress. Bethany had brought her slate and books, setting up under the cottonwood tree for the morning's lessons. Between reading passages and arithmetic problems, the children would run to see how the schoolhouse was progressing, their excitement palpable. By mid-morning, the walls were up and the men had moved to the roof. The older boys handed up shingles while Vaughn, Sam, and Hector nailed them in place. Wiley worked on fashioning a door from the better pieces of lumber. Sela's tanner returned around noon, this time with the town marshal, a thin man named Pritchard who looked perpetually dyspeptic. "Garrison," Marshal Pritchard called. "Tanner here says these men are trespassing." Bethany set down her chalk. "They're here at my invitation, Marshal." "As I told Mr. Tanner yesterday, this is my property." "Property you haven't paid taxes on in full," Tanner interjected smugly. Vaughn climbed down from the roof, landing with a soft thud beside Bethany. "Is that true?" he asked quietly, her cheeks flushed. "I'm behind by one payment." "Times have been difficult, but how much?" Vaughn interrupted. "That's not your concern," she whispered fiercely. "How much, Tanner?" Vaughn called, his voice carrying across the yard. The rancher smirked. $38.75 plus interest. Due end of the month or the county claims the land. Without hesitation, Vaughn reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. He counted out $40 and handed it to the marshal. "That should cover it, with some to spare." Pritchard looked startled but took the money. "Well, I suppose that settles the matter for now." Tanner's face darkened with anger. "This isn't over, Quinn. You can't just ride in here and what? Help a widow teach children, pay legitimate taxes. Which of those offends you, Tanner?" The rancher's hand drifted toward his gun, but the marshal stepped between them. "That's enough. No trouble, Selas. You got what you came for." After they'd gone, Bethany rounded on Vaughn, her eyes flashing. "I don't need your charity." It wasn't charity, it was an investment. Vaughn met her gaze steadily. "In those children, in what you're doing here. I would have found a way, I've no doubt, but why struggle alone when help is offered freely?" He gestured toward the nearly completed schoolhouse. "Accept the assistance, Mrs. Garrison. Not for yourself, if your pride won't allow it, but for them." Her expression softened as she looked at the children who had gathered around Emma. The little girl was carefully sounding out words from a primer, the other orphans encouraging her progress. "Very well," Bethany conceded. "But it's a loan, Mr. Quinn. I'll repay you." He tipped his hat with a smile. "As you wish, madam." The work continued through the afternoon and into the evening. As the sun began to set, Vaughn placed the last shingle on the roof and climbed down to survey their accomplishment. The schoolhouse wasn't fancy, but it was solid, a single room with a pitched roof, real glass windows salvaged from the abandoned ranch house outside town, and a sturdy door with a proper latch. Inside, Hector had constructed simple benches and desks from the remaining lumber. Wiley had fashioned a teacher's desk that stood at the front of the room, and Sam had built shelves along one wall for books and supplies. The children had gathered wildflowers, arranging them in tin cans on the windowsills. Emma and two other girls had swept the floor until it was as clean as packed earth could be, and the older boys had collected smooth stones to line the path to the door. As twilight deepened, Bethany lit lanterns and hung them from hooks inside the new building, casting a warm glow through the windows. The effect was magical, a beacon of light in the gathering darkness. "Children," she called, "come inside now. I have something to say." They assembled quickly, their faces expectant. Vaughn and his friends stood back, allowing Bethany this moment with her pupils. "Tomorrow," she told them, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes, "we will have our first proper day of school in our very own schoolhouse." She gestured around the room. "This is a special place. A place of learning, of growth, of possibilities. But more than that, it's a place that proves when people work together with kindness and purpose, wonderful things can happen." She looked directly at Vaughn then, and the gratitude in her expression made his chest tighten. Mr. Quinn and his friends have given us an incredible gift. I expect each of you to honor that gift by trying your very best every day." "Yes, Mrs. Garrison," the children chorused. "Now off home with you. Rest well for tomorrow." As the children dispersed into the evening, calling goodnight to each other and to the men who had built their schoolhouse, Bethany approached Vaughn. "I believe I owe you a proper dinner, at least, you and your friends." Sam chuckled, slapping Vaughn on the back. "Much as I'd love to accept, madam, we've got to be heading back, got jobs waiting." He winked at Vaughn. "Though I reckon Quinn here might stick around a spell. He's between engagements, so to speak." Vaughn shot his friend a warning look, but Bethany was already nodding. "Then just you, Mr. Quinn, unless you're also eager to move on." There was something in her tone, a hint of challenge, perhaps, or invitation that made Vaughn's decision easy. "I'd be delighted, Mrs. Garrison." His friends departed with knowing grins and promises to visit again, leaving Vaughn alone with Bethany as the stars emerged overhead. Her cabin was modest but meticulously clean. A curtain divided the single room, separating her sleeping area from the small kitchen and sitting space. She lit a lamp and stoked the fire in the cookstove, then began preparing a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. Vaughn sat at the small table, feeling unusually self-conscious. He'd removed his hat and gun belt at the door, and without them, he felt strangely vulnerable. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Quinn," Bethany said as she worked. "You know my story, but I know very little of yours." Vaughn leaned back in his chair. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, raised on a small cattle ranch. After my father died, we lost the place. I've been making my way west ever since, taking work where I can find it. Family, none living." The admission came easier than it once had. "My mother passed when I was 14, no siblings." Bethany nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's a hard country for keeping those we love." "You mentioned you were a carpenter's daughter," Vaughn said, shifting the conversation. "Where was home for you?" "Pennsylvania." She smiled at some memory. "A small town not unlike this one, though greener. My father built houses, furniture, anything people needed. My mother taught at the local school." She set 2 bowls of stew on the table and brought the cornbread. "They would have approved of what you did today. And your husband, Daniel, was it?" "Yes." She sat across from him. "We met at a teacher's college in Philadelphia. Both of us wanted to bring education to places that needed it most. We came west after the war, thinking to make a difference." Her expression grew distant. He would have been amazed by the schoolhouse. It's exactly what he envisioned. They ate in companionable silence for a time, the stew warming Vaughn from the inside. It had been a long while since he'd shared a meal with someone who wasn't a fellow ranch hand or trail rider. "The children adore you," he observed. "Especially little Emma." Bethany's expression softened. "Emma lost her parents in a wagon accident 2 years ago. She's been passed between families who take her in more for the extra hands than out of compassion." She sighed. "She has such a bright mind, all of them do if given the chance to develop it." "And now they will," Vaughn said with certainty. "You've given them that." "We have," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have provided a proper schoolhouse without you." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Vaughn felt a pull toward this determined woman who had carved out a place for herself and these forgotten children against considerable odds. The moment stretched, then Bethany stood to clear the dishes. "It's getting late," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "And tomorrow will be a big day for everyone." Vaughn rose to help her, their hands brushing as they both reached for the same bowl. The brief contact sent a current through him that had nothing to do with the day's physical labor. "Where are you staying while in town?" she asked, moving to the basin to wash the dishes. "Hadn't given it much thought," Vaughn admitted. "Likely the boarding house if they have a vacant room, Mrs. Peterson's place." Bethany shook her head. "She'll charge you double what it's worth. There's a cot in the back room of the mercantile. Mr. Collins lets it to trustworthy travelers for 25 cents a night." "I'll look into it, thank you." He handed her the last plate. "And thank you for dinner. It's been a long time since I've had a home-cooked meal." She smiled up at him. "It was the least I could do." At the door, Vaughn hesitated. What time do lessons begin tomorrow? 8 o'clock, though I'll be there earlier to prepare. I'll come by. There are a few finishing touches the schoolhouse could use. You've done more than enough. I'd like to see it through properly. His voice was firm but gentle. Good night, Mrs. Garrison. Good night, Mr. Quinn. She paused, then added softly, and thank you, truly. As Vaughn walked toward the mercantile, he found himself smiling. The town of Cottonwood Creek suddenly seemed like a fine place to linger for a while. Morning dawned clear and bright, the new schoolhouse gleaming in the early sunlight. Vaughn arrived just as Bethany was unlocking the door, a basket of supplies on her arm. Good morning, she greeted him, surprise and pleasure mingling in her voice. You're early. Promised a few finishing touches. He held up a small wooden sign he'd carved during the pre-dawn hours. Every school needs a name. Bethany took the sign, her fingers tracing the carefully chiseled letters. Garrison School, her eyes filled with unexpected tears. It's perfect, thank you. Together they mounted the sign above the door, just as the first children began to arrive. Emma led the group, wearing a freshly pressed dress that was clearly her Sunday best, her wheat-colored braids tied with faded blue ribbons. Is it really ours, Mrs. Garrison? She asked, staring up at the schoolhouse with awe. It is indeed, Emma. Bethany squeezed the girl's shoulder. Shall we go inside? The children filed in reverently, gasping at the transformation. During the night, Vaughn had added a few more touches: curtains made from flour sacks for the windows, a small shelf by the door for lunch pails, and a bell mounted outside that could be rung to signal the start of classes. Where will you sit, Mr. Quinn? Emma asked, tugging at his sleeve. Vaughn knelt beside her. I'm not a student, little one. This is your school. But you built it, she insisted. Doesn't that make it yours too? Bethany intervened gently. Mr. Quinn has other responsibilities, Emma. But perhaps he'd like to visit sometimes to see how you're progressing with your studies. Vaughn looked up at Bethany, sensing the tentative invitation in her words. I'd like that very much. The next few hours were a revelation to Vaughn. He sat at the back of the room, watching as Bethany conducted her first official day of school. Her patience was remarkable, encouraging the slowest readers, challenging the quickest minds, maintaining order with nothing more than a firm look or gentle word. By midday, when the children were released for lunch, Vaughn had gained a new appreciation for the teaching profession. The pupils scattered to eat their simple meals in the shade of the cottonwood tree, leaving him alone with Bethany. You're a natural teacher, he told her as she organized papers at her desk. She looked up with a smile. It's easier with a proper space. The children are more focused, more. She searched for the right word. Dignified, Vaughn supplied. They feel respected here. Yes, exactly. She tilted her head, studying him. You're very perceptive for a cowhand. I've had a few good teachers in my time, he replied. Not all lessons come from books. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several townspeople. To Vaughn's surprise, they weren't coming to complain but to see the new schoolhouse for themselves. Word had spread quickly. Mr. Collins from the mercantile presented Bethany with a box of chalk and a new slate. The blacksmith's wife brought a clock for the wall. Even the saloon owner's daughter appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers and a shy request to join the classes when her duties allowed. Bethany accepted each gift with genuine gratitude, tears threatening again as the community's support manifested in these tangible ways. Vaughn stood back, watching her interact with her neighbors, noting how many of them seemed to be seeing her in a new light now that the schoolhouse gave legitimacy to her efforts. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Silas Tanner and a few of the harder men in town made a point of riding past and making disparaging remarks, but they were increasingly in the minority. By the end of that first day, it was clear that the Garrison School had found its place in Cottonwood Creek. As the children departed for the day, chattering excitedly about their lessons, Bethany stood in the doorway beside Vaughn, a contented expression on her face. I should thank you again, she said quietly. You've thanked me enough. No, she turned to face him fully. I don't think I can ever thank you enough, Mr. Quinn. Vaughn, he corrected gently. After building a schoolhouse together, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you? Her smile deepened. Vaughn, then, and you should call me Bethany. Bethany, he repeated, liking the feel of her name on his tongue. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of a meadowlark and the rustle of leaves in the cottonwood tree. How long will you stay in Cottonwood Creek? She finally asked, her tone carefully casual. Vaughn considered the question. He'd originally planned to pass through, perhaps rest for a day or two before continuing west, but now, I'm not certain. I hadn't given it much thought. I see, was there disappointment in her voice. Though I must say, he continued, I've taken a liking to the place, more than I expected to. Their eyes met, and the connection between them seemed to strengthen. Vaughn felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a warmth, a certainty that had been absent from his wandering life for too long. The town could use a man with your carpentry skills, Bethany suggested, and other talents, I'm sure. Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Bethany? She laughed, the sound as refreshing as spring water. I'm merely pointing out possibilities. I appreciate the suggestion. He hesitated, then added, I've been thinking I might speak with Mr. Collins about that patch of land adjacent to his store. It's been sitting empty since I arrived. Oh, her interest was evident. A town with a proper school might benefit from a proper furniture maker. Desks, chairs, bookshelves. He trailed off, watching her expression. You're thinking of staying permanently? The surprise in her voice was unmistakable. I'm considering it, he admitted. For the right reasons. Before she could respond, Emma came running back, her braids flying behind her. Mrs. Garrison, I forgot my reader. The moment between them broken, Bethany turned to help the child locate her book. Vaughn tipped his hat and took his leave, his mind churning with possibilities he hadn't considered in years, putting down roots, building something lasting, finding a purpose beyond the next horizon. Over the following weeks, Vaughn's consideration evolved into decision, then action. Mr. Collins was more than willing to sell the vacant lot beside his store, particularly when Vaughn offered a fair price in cash and promised to build a structure that would enhance the town's appearance. Work began immediately on a combined workshop and living quarters. Each morning before starting construction on his own place, Vaughn would stop by the schoolhouse to check if any repairs or improvements were needed. These brief encounters with Bethany quickly became the highlight of his day. She'd always greet him with a smile, often having a cup of coffee waiting. They'd talk about the children's progress, town events, or sometimes deeper matters, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. Vaughn found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to another, his regret at not completing his own education, his hope to create things of beauty and usefulness with his hands, his longing for a place to truly call home. Bethany listened without judgment, offering insights from her own experiences that often shifted his perspective in unexpected ways. The children, too, embraced Vaughn's presence. The older boys sought his advice on everything from whittling to horseback riding, while the younger ones simply enjoyed having a male figure who showed genuine interest in their accomplishments. Emma, in particular, had attached herself to him, often running to show him her improving penmanship or recite newly memorized verses. She's flourishing, Bethany remarked one afternoon as they watched Emma helping a younger child with letters. They all are. Thanks to you, Vaughn replied. Thanks to us, she corrected, touching his arm briefly. The casual contact sent warmth through him, as it always did. These moments of connection were becoming more frequent between them, a hand on an arm, shoulders brushing as they examined a student's work, fingers touching when passing a book or tool. Silas Tanner continued to be a thorn in their side, though his influence seemed to be waning. When he discovered that Vaughn was establishing a permanent business in town, he'd made a point of loudly proclaiming that no drifter-turned-carpenter would get any work from his ranch. But as Vaughn's skill with furniture became evident first in pieces he crafted for the schoolhouse, then in commissions from other townspeople, even Tanner's ranch hands began to quietly request items. By midsummer, Vaughn's workshop was completed and operating. His living quarters above the shop were simple but comfortable, with windows that caught the morning light and offered a view of both the main street and, more importantly, the schoolhouse in the distance. One evening in late July, a month after Vaughn had officially opened his furniture business, Bethany appeared at his workshop door. School had been dismissed early due to the intense heat, and Vaughn was working on a set of bookshelves commissioned by the town's doctor. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying over the sound of his planing. "Is this a bad time?" Vaughn set down his tools immediately. "Not at all. Please come in." He quickly brushed wood shavings from his shirt, suddenly conscious of his disheveled appearance. "Can I offer you some water?" "It's about all I have that's fit for company," she smiled, stepping into the workshop. "Water would be lovely, thank you." As he poured from the pitcher he kept cool in a bucket of well water, Vaughn noticed that Bethany was wearing a dress he hadn't seen before, pale green cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. Her hair was arranged differently too, with soft tendrils framing her face. "You look very nice today," he said, handing her the cup. "Special occasion," a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you, and yes, actually, the town council met this afternoon." "Oh," Vaughn leaned against his workbench. "Good news, I hope, the best." Her eyes shone with excitement. "They've officially recognized the Garrison School and agreed to provide a small stipend for supplies and my salary. It's not much, but it's regular income, and more importantly, it means the children's education is now sanctioned by the town." "Bethany, that's wonderful." Without thinking, Vaughn stepped forward and embraced her. She stiffened momentarily in surprise, then relaxed against him, her hands coming to rest lightly on his back. The moment stretched beyond what might be considered proper, but neither seemed inclined to end it. When they finally separated, both were slightly flushed. "I wanted you to be the first to know," Bethany said softly. "None of this would have happened without you." "I just built a building," Vaughn demurred. "You've built lives." She shook her head, stepping closer again. "You built more than a schoolhouse, Vaughn Quinn. You built possibility, hope." Her eyes held his steadily. "For the children and for me." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Vaughn was acutely aware of her nearness, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the way the fading sunlight through the window illuminated half her face while casting the other half in shadow. "Bethany, he began, then hesitated, uncertain of his right to speak what was in his heart. "Yes," her voice was barely above a whisper. Before he could continue, the workshop door burst open and Emma rushed in, breathless and disheveled. "Mr. Quinn, Mrs. Garrison, come quick. Men are at the schoolhouse with torches." Vaughn grabbed his gun belt from the hook by the door, buckling it as he ran. Bethany gathered her skirts and followed, her face tight with fear. Emma led them through the deepening twilight toward the school, where the flicker of torchlight was visible even from a distance. 3 men on horseback circled the schoolhouse, passing a bottle between them. As Vaughn, Bethany, and Emma approached, one of the men dismounted and staggered toward the building, torch raised threateningly. "That's far enough," Vaughn called, his voice cutting through the evening air. His hand rested on his holstered revolver, but he didn't draw. The men turned, surprise and defiance mingling on their faces. Vaughn recognized 2 of them as hands from Tanner's ranch. The third was Tanner himself, swaying slightly from drink but no less dangerous for it. "Well, if it ain't the schoolmarm and her pet carpenter," Tanner slurred. "Evening, folks. We was just discussing how this fine building would look with a bit more warmth to it." He gestured with the torch, sending sparks floating into the darkening sky. "Put that down, Tanner," Vaughn said evenly. "You've had your fun, time to go home." "Don't think I will," the rancher's face hardened. "This school's been nothing but trouble, filling kids' heads with nonsense, taking them away from honest work. Teaching in Jun orphans and half-breeds like they's equal to white children. Every child deserves an education," Bethany said firmly, stepping forward despite Vaughn's protective arm. "And I'll teach anyone willing to learn, regardless of their background." Tanner spat on the ground. "That's the problem with you Eastern do-gooders. Don't understand how things work out here." "I understand perfectly well," she replied, her voice steady despite her evident fear. I understand that ignorance breeds hatred, and hatred destroys communities. I understand that these children, all of them, deserve better than to be condemned to lives of servitude because men like you fear what might happen if they learn to think for themselves." Her words hung in the air, powerful in their simple truth. One of Tanner's hands shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, clearly having second thoughts about their errand. Tanner, however, grew more belligerent. "You uppity!" He lurched forward, torch raised. In one fluid motion, Vaughn drew his revolver and fired into the air. The sound cracked through the twilight, startling Tanner's horse, which reared and whinnied in alarm. The other horses, too, began to sidestep nervously. "Next one won't be a warning," Vaughn said quietly. "Drop the torch, Silas." For a moment, it seemed the rancher might challenge him, but something in Vaughn's steady gaze must have conveyed his absolute determination. With a curse, Tanner hurled the torch to the ground, where Bethany quickly stamped it out with her boot. "This ain't over," the rancher growled, remounting his skittish horse with difficulty. "Actually, it is," came a new voice. Marshal Pritchard emerged from the shadows, shotgun in hand. Behind him stood several townspeople, including Mr. Collins and the blacksmith. "I believe that was attempted arson we just witnessed, Tanner, not to mention threatening a lady and disturbing the peace." Tanner's face registered shock, then calculation. "Just having some fun, Marshal, no harm done. That's for the judge to decide." Pritchard gestured with his shotgun. "You boys can come along peaceful like to the jail, or we can make this more difficult." Outnumbered and outgunned, Tanner and his men had little choice but to comply. As they were led away, Bethany sagged against Vaughn, the tension finally catching up with her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his arm instinctively going around her waist to steady her. She nodded against his shoulder. "Just shaken, I never thought." She looked up at the schoolhouse, intact but for some muddy bootprints on the steps. They really would have burned it down. "But they didn't," Vaughn reminded her gently. "And now everyone's seen Tanner's true colors." Indeed, more townspeople were arriving, drawn by the commotion. They gathered around Bethany and Vaughn, expressing outrage at Tanner's actions and offering support. Mr. Collins announced he'd organize a night watch for the schoolhouse until things settled down. Emma, who had hidden behind a tree during the confrontation, now ran to Bethany and wrapped her arms around the teacher's waist. "I was so scared, Mrs. Garrison. When I saw them with the torches, I ran as fast as I could to get Mr. Quinn." "You did exactly right, Emma." Bethany knelt to the child's level. "You were very brave." "Like a real hero in the stories," Emma agreed solemnly. She looked up at Vaughn, "just like Mr. Quinn." The crowd gradually dispersed as darkness fell completely, leaving Vaughn, Bethany, and Emma standing before the schoolhouse under a sky brilliant with stars. "I should get you home," Vaughn said to Emma. "Your guardians will be worried." The little girl's face fell. "They don't worry much about me. They probably haven't even noticed I'm gone." Bethany and Vaughn exchanged concerned glances. It wasn't the first time Emma had made such comments about the family that had reluctantly taken her in after her parents' death. "Nevertheless," Bethany said gently, "it's late and tomorrow is a school day. Mr. Quinn will escort you home and I'll see you in the morning." "Can't I stay with you tonight, Mrs. Garrison?" Emma pleaded. "Please, I promise I won't be any trouble." Bethany hesitated, clearly torn. "Emma, you know that's not. I think tonight might be an exception," Vaughn interrupted quietly. "After what she's been through." Bethany studied his face, then nodded. "Very well, just for tonight, Emma. I'll speak with the Hendersons tomorrow." The girl's face lit up with relief and joy. "Thank you, I'll be ever so good, I promise." "I know you will." Bethany took her hand. "Now, shall we all walk home together?" The three of them made their way through the quiet streets, Emma between them, chattering about the excitement despite her earlier fear. At Bethany's cabin, Vaughn paused at the door. "I'll check on you both in the morning," he promised, "and I'll speak with Marshal Pritchard about pressing charges against Tanner." "Thank you." Bethany's eyes held his in the lantern light. "For everything." "Get some rest," he said softly, resisting the urge to touch her cheek, to draw her close again as he had in the workshop before they were interrupted. "Good night, Bethany. Good night, Vaughn." As he walked back to his quarters above the workshop, Vaughn's mind was filled not with the confrontation at the schoolhouse, but with the moment before Bethany standing in his workshop, her eyes bright with accomplishment, the unspoken connection between them nearly palpable. Tonight had interrupted something significant, he was certain, but perhaps it had only delayed the inevitable. Tanner and his men spent 3 days in the town jail before the circuit judge arrived. The trial was brief but consequential. Faced with multiple witnesses to his attempted arson and threatening behavior, Tanner was fined heavily and placed on probation. More significantly for the rancher, his reputation in the community was permanently damaged. Several of his hands quit, and businesses in town became noticeably less accommodating to his demands. For the schoolhouse, the incident had the opposite effect. Attendance increased as families who had been hesitant about education now saw it as a community value worth defending. Bethany found herself with several new pupils, including 2 adults who shyly requested evening lessons to improve their reading. The town council's recognition of the school became more tangible as well. They commissioned Vaughn to build additional desks and a proper blackboard, and voted to allocate funds for books and supplies. Even the wealthier ranchers, perhaps motivated by Tanner's example of what not to do, began to donate to the school's upkeep. Through it all, Vaughn and Bethany grew closer. Their shared experience defending the schoolhouse had created a bond that deepened with each passing day. They fell into a comfortable pattern breakfast together at the cafe before school started, Vaughn stopping by at lunch when his work allowed. Evenings often spent on the schoolhouse steps, discussing the day's events. The townspeople began to take their relationship for granted, referring to them as a pair without thinking. "Ask Vaughn and Bethany," they'd say, or "check with the teacher and the carpenter." Neither corrected this assumption, though they had not formally acknowledged the nature of their connection even to each other. Emma, meanwhile, had become their unofficial bridge. After the night of Tanner's attempt on the schoolhouse, Bethany had indeed spoken with the Hendersons about the child's care. What emerged was that the family, while not deliberately neglectful, was overwhelmed with their own 6 children and had taken Emma primarily for the extra government stipend provided to those who housed orphans. "She's no trouble, Mrs. Henderson had admitted, but we've hardly the time or energy to give her the attention a child needs." The solution, proposed cautiously by Bethany and supported enthusiastically by Vaughn, was for Emma to stay with Bethany during the week and return to the Hendersons only for weekends. The arrangement suited everyone, especially Emma, who blossomed under Bethany's care and Vaughn's frequent presence. One crisp September evening, nearly 3 months after the schoolhouse was built, Vaughn invited Bethany and Emma to accompany him on a picnic. He'd been working on a secret project in his spare time and was finally ready to reveal it. They rode in his wagon to a spot along the creek that gave the town its name, where cottonwood trees provided dappled shade and the water gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones. Vaughn spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the basket he'd prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts from the baker, and lemonade sweetened with honey. As they ate, Emma told stories about the tadpoles she was monitoring in a jar at school and the book about faraway places that Bethany was reading to the class. Vaughn listened attentively, marveling at how this child, not his by blood but increasingly dear to his heart, had changed his perspective on what mattered in life. When the meal was finished and Emma had gone to wade in the shallow part of the creek within their sight, Vaughn turned to Bethany. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly nervous. "For both of you, actually." From beneath the wagon seat, he withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Placing it in Bethany's hands, he watched as she carefully unwrapped it. It was a miniature schoolhouse, perfect in every detail, from the pitched roof to the tiny bell, from the glass windows to the sign that read Garrison School. She gasped, turning it in her hands to admire the craftsmanship. "Vaughn, it's exquisite. Did you make this?" He nodded, pleased by her reaction. "Open it," he suggested. She looked puzzled but found the tiny latch that allowed the roof to lift. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a gold ring set with a small, perfect pearl. Bethany's eyes widened, her gaze flying to his face. Vaughn. He took her hands in his, the miniature schoolhouse cradled between them. Bethany, these past months have shown me what I've been searching for all my life without knowing it. A purpose, a home. He paused, gathering courage, and someone to share them with. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I am. He took a deep breath. I love you, Bethany Garrison. I love your strength, your compassion, your determination to make the world better. I love the way you see possibilities where others see obstacles. I love watching you with the children, especially Emma. He glanced toward the creek, where the little girl was happily arranging stones in patterns. I want to build a life with you, a family, if you'll have me. Bethany set the schoolhouse carefully on the blanket, then placed her hands on either side of Vaughn's face. I have loved you, she said softly, since the day you appeared at my makeshift school and saw value in what I was trying to do. You didn't just build us a schoolhouse, Vaughn Quinn. You built us a future. She leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle touch that deepened as he wrapped his arms around her. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, they turned to find Emma watching them with wide eyes and a delighted expression. Does this mean Mr. Quinn is going to be my papa now? She asked, running to them. Bethany and Vaughn exchanged startled glances, then Vaughn held out his arm to include Emma in their embrace. Would you like that, little one? Emma nodded solemnly. More than anything. Then I would have a mama and a papa again, and we could all live together, and I would never have to go back to the Hendersons. It's not quite that simple, Bethany began gently, but we could work toward that, Vaughn interrupted, his eyes meeting Bethany's with a question. When she nodded, he continued, If you would like us to be your family, Emma, I promise we will do everything in our power to make that happen legally. The little girl's face glowed with happiness. I knew it. I knew when you built our schoolhouse that you were special, Mr. Quinn. Mrs. Henderson said you were just passing through, but I told her you would stay forever. Smart girl, Vaughn chuckled, ruffling her damp hair. And once we're a proper family, you'll have to call me something other than Mr. Quinn. Papa, Emma said decisively. I'll call you Papa and Mrs. Garrison will be Mama. She looked between them anxiously. Is that all right? Bethany's eyes were wet with tears again. It's more than all right, Emma. It's perfect. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late October, when the cottonwood trees had turned golden and the air carried the first hints of winter. The entire town turned out, filling the newly constructed church to capacity. Even Silas Tanner, somewhat humbled by his legal troubles and the community's reaction, attended with a grudging respect for the couple who had changed Cottonwood Creek for the better. Bethany wore a gown of ivory satin that Mr. Collins had specially ordered from Denver, with a veil trimmed in lace that had belonged to her mother. Emma, as flower girl, preceded her down the aisle, scattering petals and beaming with pride in her new blue dress. Vaughn, standing at the altar in a new suit that felt foreign after years in trail clothes, watched Bethany approach with a sense of wonder that this extraordinary woman had chosen to share her life with him. The minister's words washed over him, but all he could focus on was Bethany's face, radiant with happiness and promise. I do, he said when the time came, his voice clear and certain. I do, Bethany echoed, squeezing his hands. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted throughout the church. Emma rushed forward to embrace them both, completing the family circle they had created. The reception was held at the schoolhouse, transformed for the occasion with ribbons, flowers, and tables laden with food contributed by every household in town. Children played games in the yard while adults danced to fiddle music provided by the blacksmith and his sons. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the celebration. Late in the evening, as the festivities continued, Vaughn led Bethany away from the crowd to the spot where he had first seen her teaching under the tattered canvas awning. Do you remember that day? He asked, drawing her close. How could I forget? The mysterious cowboy who appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. She touched his cheek tenderly. Did you ever imagine when you rode into Cottonwood Creek that you would find a home here? Not for a moment, he admitted. I was just looking for a drink and a place to rest before moving on. He gazed toward the schoolhouse, now filled with light and laughter. Instead, I found a purpose, and you, and Emma, Bethany added. The judge approved the adoption papers yesterday. I was saving it as a wedding surprise. Vaughn's eyes widened. Truly, she's legally ours, truly, our daughter in every sense that matters. Bethany's smile was luminous in the moonlight. Our family. He pulled her into a kiss that expressed everything words could not: gratitude, joy, and the promise of a future built on the foundation they had created together. Mrs. Quinn, he murmured against her lips. I rather like the sound of that, she replied, her arms tightening around his neck. From the schoolhouse doorway, Emma called to them. Mama, Papa, it's time for the wedding cake. They turned toward their daughter's voice, hand in hand, ready to rejoin their community and celebrate the beginning of their life together. Shall we? Vaughn asked, offering his arm. Always, Bethany replied, taking it. As they walked back to the schoolhouse that had brought them together, the symbol of both their individual dreams and their shared future, Vaughn reflected on how a simple act of kindness had led to the greatest happiness he had ever known. He had built a schoolhouse in a day, but in doing so, he had found a lifetime of love, purpose, and belonging. The years that followed brought changes to Cottonwood Creek. The town grew steadily, attracting new businesses and families drawn by its reputation for valuing education and community. Vaughn's furniture shop expanded to include a lumberyard and building supply store, while Bethany's school grew to require 2 additional teachers and a larger building designed by Vaughn, of course. Emma thrived under their care, developing into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman with her mother's love of learning and her father's practical skills. By the time she was 16, she was already assisting with the younger students and declared her intention to become a teacher herself. She was joined in the family by 2 brothers, Daniel, named for Bethany's first husband, and James, for Vaughn's father, and a sister, Sarah, who arrived on the 5th anniversary of the day Vaughn had built the original schoolhouse. Their home, expanded several times to accommodate the growing family, became the heart of the community, a place where ideas were discussed, celebrations were held, and no child in need was ever turned away. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Vaughn presented Bethany with a special gift, the deed to a larger piece of land on the edge of town and plans for a proper academy that would serve children from all the surrounding ranches and settlements. You never stop building, do you? Bethany teased, though her eyes shone with emotion as she examined the detailed drawings. Not as long as there are dreams to construct, Vaughn replied, gathering her close. And I have you to thank for teaching me that the most important foundations aren't made of wood or stone. As they stood together, watching their children play in the yard of the home they had created, Bethany leaned her head against Vaughn's shoulder. Do you ever think about that first day, when you found me teaching under that awful canvas? Every day, he admitted. Every single day. For in that moment, when a drifting cowboy had found a widow teaching orphans to read, the true construction had begun, not just of a schoolhouse, but of a love that would shelter and nurture generations to come.